Good afternoon and welcome back to RAREfest 2020. My name is Adam Pearson and I am absolutely delighted to be chairing this panel entitled How Do We Start This Conversation? Discussing things like rare disease can be an absolute minefield in terms of language, accessibility, and attitudes. So what I thought I would do is gather a cavalcade of friends to help break this down, people who excel in the area of discussing rare diseases, and just bounce the idea around, see what we all think, and hopefully leave you all with something to go away with so that once we've all logged off of this festival, we can go out into our real world and real lives and keep this momentum going. So, let me look who shall be my first victim to introduce themselves. I'm going to go with Vicki.
Hi, I'm Vicki Donald. I have a daughter, Holly, who is 12 years old and has a genetic condition, Neurofibromatosis Type 1. We have wrote blogs with the help of Graham Miller at Really Real Resources. Holly's had a year-long documentary of photographs done by Graham that documented her journey through NF and having chemotherapy for a brain tumour. Take some pictures as well, and Holly's also done some YouTube videos again with Really Real Resources, hoping to shed a wee bit of light onto Holly's condition through the means of media. And I'm very happy to be here.
It's funny you mentioned Graham Miller, because he is also on this panel. How are you doing, Graham?
I'm doing all right. Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I'm Graham Miller, so I'm based in Scotland. I'm a documentary photographer, and I'm also founder of social enterprise called Really Real Resources. I have a degree in pure and applied chemistry, which I don't often own up to, and I have an MA in documentary photography. And so today's event is exciting for me because I rarely, it's a good choice of words, right? Rarely have the opportunity to bring the scientist and the artist and me together like this. For more than 10 years, I've worked exclusively with those at risk, trying to challenge stigma using a traditional documentary photography type approach. And what I aim to do is show life is really lived in a non-judgmental way. It became clear to me a couple of years ago that I needed to create something bigger and to involve other photographers if we were really going to have a significant impact. And so I created Really Real Resources, the social enterprise, which is a media archive. Because, you know, the images, let's all face it, the images we see in the press and in regular stock libraries are just not representative of real lives. In fact, I would say they're often misleading, damaging, and of pretty poor quality. That's pretty much across the board. And so our content is really real, and we call them resources as we plan to deploy them in different ways. And so we license our images from our secure archive, and we're also starting to work on an interesting project with the education department here in Scotland to use materials as part of a challenging discussion, materials we can use in schools for education. So I hope you'll look at what we do and support us by using our images where you can. But today's discussion goes to the very heart of what I need to achieve. It's an imperative. I often hear the comment that things are so much better nowadays for the disabled. They've moved on. We all here know we are only still scratching the surface of the public's understanding. And that's particularly true for the conditions being discussed here at RAREfest20. So, you know, I know we all feel the support and warmth of this community, but need to engage and influence those out there if we're going to increase understanding, leading to greater inclusion that would inevitably follow. So thanks, Adam, very much for the invite. Love to be here, and I very much welcome the invitation to join what will be, I'm sure, an interesting discussion. So thank you very much.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you here, Graham. You set a high bar, Dagmar Bennett, for happy to be here. Can you match that?
I know that was quite an introduction. Hi everybody, my name is Dagmar Bennett, and I'm a sculptor, a creative producer, and I also work in the innovation team within the Prince's Trust. So my story is I met Adam around 6 years ago, and I created a hyper-realistic sculpture of him, which we now call Adam Jr. And Adam and myself work collectively to do events like this and really to share that art can be a real vehicle to create change. So that's where my passion is, as well as working for the Prince's Trust, where I've set up a series of equality, diversity and inclusion talks, which Adam was just on a couple of months ago. And that's very much looking at how can I be an ally and help make a change for people. Thank you. Thank you, Joe, for today, and thank you for the RAREfest for having me, and Adam.
It's always a pleasure to have you here, Dagmar Bennett. Moving on now to Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo. Jordon, how are you doing, good sir?
Hi. I'm Jordon Mossom. I'm a documentary photographer like Graham, but I'm from Cumbria and I live with Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy. I'm a recent university graduate where I completed a photography degree, and as part of this, I documented my day-to-day life during the early part of lockdown to show what day-to-day life is like living with a rare disease, using medical equipment and relying on support staff to help with my independence. I wanted to create a series of images that were honest and showed daily life from the perspective of somebody who has lived experience of a rare disease, and not create a series that looks awkward and set up like you see in most disabled literature and brochures, that kind of thing.
Amazing. Well, thank you for being here, good sir, and I look forward to having your input throughout the course of this session.
Thank you.
And last, but by no means least, Ross, my man, how's it going?
Hello. So my name's Ross Lannon. I'm 27 years old and I'm a lifestyle and disability blogger from Cornwall. Tier 1 Cornwall guys, so please don't hate on me. I know there's a lot of debate at the minute. So I have a condition called Spinal Muscular Atrophy, which is a progressive muscle wasting condition. As you can probably see, I'm a full-time wheelchair user. And I think the reason that I sort of was asked to be involved in this today is because I started a blog back in 2017 as a way of sort of documenting my life as a young adult with a physical disability. So yeah, my blog is called A Life on Wheels, and I tend to review accessible events, activities, and just share sort of comical lifestyle stories, really. I always refer to myself as a really positive person, and I'm passionate about representing people with disabilities in the media with a really positive outlook on life. So I've done various bits of media work myself. I've always had this passion to work within the media, whether that's TV, magazine, radio. And yeah, I just think it's great to have representatives and role models from our community, really.
Well, you are certainly one of those, good sir, and much like everyone, it's a pleasure to have you on this panel. Just to say, as we continue this conversation, we are going to be doing a Q&A at the end of all of this, so if there's anything that anyone says that sort of piques your interest, feel free to bang a question in the chat. It will come through to us, and if it's good, we'll answer it. If it's not good, we'll probably answer it anyway. So moving on, why do we think this conversation is so difficult to begin with? Vicki, I'm gonna start with you as a parent of a fellow NF warrior who very much mixes in the same world that I do. Why do you think we struggle to even get this conversation started in a meaningful way?
I think people are scared. They're scared to say the wrong thing to you, to come up with the wrong terminology that they're scared will offend, or it could be coming from a point of embarrassment. Sometimes people feel that if they ask, and in my experience, I find that some people think that asking those questions and starting that conversation crosses a line. So it tends to fall back to us ourselves within the community to start that conversation, because people don't find it easy to do that when they don't have the terminology or the tools to be able to engage and start that conversation.
So would you rather people ask, if you're out with Holly and people wanted to know the ins and outs of what the situation is, would you prefer they just asked you, excuse me, do you mind if I asked you X, Y, Z?
Sometimes, yes. There's a time and a place for everything. And we had a slight discussion about this yesterday. If you're out to lunch, no appropriate. But if I'm out in the supermarket and there's a kid pointing at Holly when she's in her wheelchair and asking her mummy questions, I'd very much rather that her mum or the child herself would come and say, why is she in her wheelchair? What's wrong with her? And then it's a very easy conversation to start, and that child will then go away with the knowledge that it was absolutely okay to ask that question and start that conversation, as opposed to being hushed up and rushed along by mum.
And is that why you work so closely with Graham to kind of make this conversation more accessible from the word go?
Yes, absolutely. We see that a lot of things that we know about Holly's condition, I know for researching online or speaking to specialist doctors, and it's not something that was ever part of my day-to-day language. Now it is. It's a conversation that I'll have most days of the week with people about Holly's condition. But when it goes into places like the media, it's not always fairly represented from Holly's point of view. Working with Graham at Really Real Resources absolutely gave us the chance to put how Holly feels and how Holly's day-to-day life is living with her condition in a real life way and in real life time. The journey that was documented where her having her chemotherapy, there is no other pictures that we know of that exist anywhere like that, and the pictures are real and they're raw, and a series of them came through when we got some really, really bad news at one of our oncology appointments. And even looking at the pictures now, I was there and I still have a twig on my heartstrings, because I can see through the pictures how real and how raw they are. And I think it's really, really important that that message comes across to everybody. So even people starting on a journey like that have real images and real stories to be able to go and compare, as opposed to things that they've learned watching a medical drama on TV, for instance.
So we've already hit on a really important term, and that's representation. And Graham, even in your intro, you hit on it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to throw to both Graham and Jordon on this, because they both work in the world of documentary and documentary photography. I'm going to go with Graham first. Why is representation so important, and how did you integrate that into your work with Vicki?
Well, I think, maybe to answer the second part of your question first, Adam, because I find that part of the process, the kind of involving in my work, is very easy, because I never try to do anything which is where I kind of represent something in a particular way. So there's very little forethought when I go into the kind of situation I was with Vicki and Holly. So I basically just try to show life as it really is, positives and minuses, and let people make their own mind up. So the representation part, I think, is easy from that perspective. But it's absolutely vital, because we are surrounded by prejudice, stigma, and it's so deeply ingrained. You have to kind of take that extra step and do something a little bit special to try and cross that void, really. But yeah, that's my feeling. Jordon, what do you think?
I think that we've got to have representation, otherwise nobody's going to see what life's really like. From my perspective, doing the project about myself was quite daunting at times, because of a fear of embarrassment when people see the work. But we all have our own lived experience of living with a rare disease or being around somebody with a rare disease. So we all have our own story to tell. It's how we try and portray those stories.
Really good. And Ross, with your blogging, you're all about kind of breaking down misconceptions. What do you think the biggest misconceptions are people have about rare disease, and how do you try and remove those barriers to, again, enable this conversation to happen effectively and fruitfully?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many general assumptions that people make with regards to people with disabilities. I mean, I can only talk from a wheelchair user's point of view, but people often automatically assume that maybe you can't drive, or you can't work, or you can't date or socialize. There's so many different things that people are scared to have those conversations or just ask you the questions. Like Vicki said, there's a way of going about it, but in my work and my blog work, I really like to break down those negative assumptions and show people more what we can do rather than what we can't do. So, you know, some of the activities I've done and reviewed on my website, there's images of me driving a powerboat, doing all sorts of different things that maybe you wouldn't so much expect a wheelchair user to be, ice skating, just keeping things positive, because although it's important to be honest and show our real lives, of course, but the media often portrays us, people with disabilities, always in a negative light. And I think it's time we should, I was going to say stand up, but excuse the pun, it's terrible, but we need to speak up a bit and just show, actually, no, we're humans being humans as well. And look what I can do.
If you don't mind me saying something, Ross, I mean, it scares me a little bit to hear what you've just said, you know, because I wonder how you feel about balance, you know, because I totally agree with you that we've kind of gone too far the other way, but do you still feel in representation we need to show both? I'm hoping you're going to say yes to this. Do we have to show both sides of the story, like the full perspective of people's lives?
Absolutely, but I think we also have to be careful of people with disabilities are so often viewed in this negative light, and we often have this, there's this thing of, I think it's referred to as like inspiration porn now, where essentially people with disabilities are sort of objectified to make other people feel better about their lives. And it's like, actually, we are more than capable of doing these things as well, and we should be seen in a positive light, as well as, obviously, we have our bad days.
And so how do we create like a level of, I suppose, allyship where non-disabled people and disabled people can work together, yet avoid these tropes of, as you say, pity porn, etc. Dagmar, I know you've done this because you've worked with me on it. What was your approach?
Yeah, hi. I just want to pick up on some of the points that Jordon, Ross, Gray and Vicki were all making, and just going back a little bit before I answer your question in terms of the positive representation that you do have to give. And I think that if you allow people to have a platform to say their own narrative, then they can be as authentic as they want, instead of having other people try and say your narrative for you. And it's like, well, you're not actually representing me as I want to. So in terms of representation, you know, Adam, you've done a really good job at it in the sense of being in the media, that we need to, you know, for me, I've just got dyslexia and I see somebody in a really high position in the media, then if we have representation at all levels of senior positions of companies and within the media, then that ultimately will inspire young people to think, actually, I can break down all of these barriers and I can be at that same stage. So yeah, that was representation. Sorry, just kind of, yeah, looking at that. And then I'd say in terms of allyship, me and you, Adam, we worked together, I don't know, for how many years? I always forget.
It was about 6 or 7 years ago. You
Yes.
tweeted a screenshot of a Word document, and then we got Copy and Caponero, and then the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah, so I guess saw Adam, yeah, about 6 or 7 years ago doing a lot of media work, and I thought, wow, this guy is really inspiring. I really need to kind of get to know him. So I reached out to him. This was before he had an agent, obviously. And I tried to understand about his life. I tried to really get to know who he was so that I could create a piece of artwork for him. So I made like a hyper-realistic sculpture, which was all of the measurements were taken. I tried to paint it exactly as, you know, as Adam was. And I think that comes back to the point of, I don't want to, as a creative, which is what Graham's touched upon, is I do not want to sensationalize somebody and make something into something that they're not. So I think if you can use art as a vehicle to create change, also to start conversations and really represent somebody as they truly are, then I think that can be really powerful. But I also think allyship, you know, part of it is about listening to, you know, what the differences are, and then the other part of it is understanding. And then once you have those two parts of your allyship, it's about looking at, well, what's the action that I'm going to change or try and help others to succeed by being their ally. So I think it's all about doing the right thing. And if you can give a voice to people, or if you can use art as a vehicle to change and break down barriers, then I think that's a successful way of being an ally, Adam.
No, I completely agree, and thank you for your answer. And there's a few words and a few things that have been gone through all your answers, and one of them is about kind of balance, but also about kind of being inspirational. How do we all feel about the word inspiration when it pertains to people with rare diseases and disabilities? Where's the line between something being inspirational and then just a disabled dude doing normal stuff? Anyone?
I think what comes from inspiration, I think we've all, like, you know, it's coming from a good place. 9 times out of 10, it's coming from a good place. But again, like Vicki said earlier, there is a time and a place. Like if I'm just going out to the shop and doing my shop, you know, getting the weekly food in, I don't really class myself as being an inspiration. But if I'm doing something that is a really great achievement, then you think, okay. So again, I think it's down to time and place. I can understand why it's annoying. I've had several comments like this on some of my social media posts, and it's like, really? Like, how is that inspirational? But I personally see it like it's coming from a good place. I don't know about any of you guys.
It's quite difficult. I think that's a really good point, Ross. It's difficult for me to try and, if you do that kind of thing, to make it not look contrived. I don't know if you can see the picture on the wall above my head behind me, but this is Callum, who has Down syndrome. This is at Murrayfield Rugby Ground in Edinburgh, and he's properly charging me down with a rugby ball. So he's playing rugby, he's having fun. That's inspiring, you know, but then to other people without the context, they think, did he set up that shot? Was it contrived? And it wasn't contrived. So it's a very difficult balance to strike, Adam, I think.
Anyone else before we move on to the next point? Because another thing that I think is really hard to balance, particularly when we're talking about rare diseases, is the balance between how much of this discussion needs to be medical and how much of this discussion needs to be human. And so, Vicki, when you discuss Holly, or when Holly discusses herself even, be it in the press or in public, how much emphasis do you think needs to be placed on the medicine, and then how much of it needs to be placed on just Holly for who she is?
I think, again, it's a balance. It's trying to strike up a balance. I think you can't speak about Holly and who she is without bringing in a certain percentage of the medical in order to be able to understand what her life is like. But I think after the initial, this is what Holly's condition is, this is what it does, then the rest of it should be about her, and it should be about her from her own perspective. There shouldn't need to be any spins added or outreach or anything like that. It should just be, yes, she has this condition, yes, this is what this condition does, this is a terminology for it, but this is who Holly is. Holly isn't her neurofibromatosis. Holly is Holly in spite of the fact she has neurofibromatosis. And I think, from my point of view, that matters so much more than any label that's going to be attached to her rare disease. And a lot of people don't see past that. They see the medical and then they make their assumptions on that before the person living with the condition has been able to put forward who they are and represent themselves in that way. And I think that's super important. And we took it all the way back to an educational setting. And when Holly first started primary school, we reached out to a local charity who supports families with neurofibromatosis, and we had their mascot, Cal, come into school, into Holly's primary, I believe it was our primary 2 class, and the mascot sat with the kids, explained a wee bit about what things were like for Holly, what it was like for her learning and making friends, and they played games. And there's some of those kids now that are in high school have told me that they still remember that day. They still remember learning what it was like for Holly trying to hold a pencil, or Holly trying to take part in PE. And that was super important, because I know that those kids who experienced that in that class that day, that's something that they'll always have with them. They'll take that forward, and that will absolutely be used within their adult life because they saw it a different way. And kids are so much easier to engage and build this conversation with. That if you do it at such an early stage, that's something that will absolutely be built on and carried throughout their life, which only leads to help and make that change as they become adults.
So if I'm reading this correctly, by taking something that's unknown and making it known and yet accessible, you can almost remove this silent anxiety that exists where people, as you said right at the top, maybe too afraid to talk or too afraid to offend. It's not that they're willfully ignorant. It's just that they don't know where to begin. What's my jumping off point here?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that, because I've seen firsthand the difference it can make from going to adults and trying to watch adults wrap their heads around all this medical information and all these things that Holly needs, to scaling it way back to primary school children who I watched have an absolute blast that afternoon when Cal was there. And it struck up the conversation. And after that, Holly was able to go to people. And when they pointed out things like her coffee or late patches, Holly was able and very comfortable to turn around and say, well, this is what this is, and this is what Cal has. And the kids were instantly able to relate to that without needing all the medical terminology that went along with it. So yeah, I do think it's very important.
And so, Jordon, gonna throw to you, as someone who works in documentary and documentary photography, what would you regard as almost best practice for separating the medical from the personhood, yet doing both of these things justice in this conversation?
I guess you've got to be kind of sensible, really. In my project, I had medical equipment as well as the normal things that I do, like sat in bed having a cup of tea and watching telly. And it's trying to show that the medical equipment isn't scary.
Mm-hmm.
It's there to help with independence and having a normal life like everybody else. And so in some of the images that I did, I tried to show that I often have a laugh using my equipment, like in the hoist. Normally I have the remote, and then I'm having the helpers take me around the bedroom. And so I think that it's good to have medical equipment in photos at times, but having it so that it's showing the emotions of what the person using them is going through.
No, I can completely agree. Is there just a lot to be said then, as part of this conversation, just using one's common sense? Dagmar, you and I have done many a event and many a school assembly where things have started off like really intense, but then the more people have sort of engaged their brains a little bit, and I don't mean that in like a disrespectful way, but the more they've had to think about something they wouldn't normally, the more it just organically falls into place. Do we use our common sense enough in this discussion?
Yeah, I think good question. I think, you know, as Vicky's touched on, I think it comes down to education. Like, education is the key for everyone to understand things more. So I think, you know, you can, yeah, people can be very scared of, you know, even myself sometimes, who doesn't have a rare disease, even I get scared, you know, being on a platform like this and thinking, oh my God, what happens if I say the wrong thing and it's not politically correct? But, you know, language is very, very powerful, and you can say a lot with the language that you use. But I think there comes an element of being like, that person is just trying to understand, and possibly they're not using the right language. So yeah, common sense is, I think people do need to use common sense, but also understand that if somebody's asking questions, then it's not perhaps they don't mean it in an offensive way, and it's down to the language that they're using, which they may not have been educated on what the right terminology is. So I think it comes down to common sense from both angles of the conversation.
You know, I get that. There needs to be a level of, I suppose, emotional intelligence there. And I think it would be completely unreasonable of me, for example, to expect someone who's literally just engaging with this to understand all the ins and outs of terminology. I mean, anyone that knows me well knows that I'm not a big fan of political correctness anyway. And so it is a case of, again, it all comes back to kind of balance and listening. And I'm going to throw to Ross on this one, and this is quite a loaded question, so I apologise in advance. Is this conversation, is it equally everyone's responsibility? Or is there a certain onus on the public to engage with this more? Is it the responsibility of people with rare diseases to almost fix a problem that they haven't created?
No, I don't think we can put the full responsibility on one group of people or anything like that at all. I think we all have a role to play as creators here in this chat, whether it's through photography, art, blogging, social media. We've all got these platforms that we represent ourselves and our views and stories, but also I think a lot of people outside of this community as well have a role to play in being open to conversations. You know, the internet is a brilliant thing, but at the end of the day, we are all humans, and we need to interact with each other and ask these questions. At the end of the day, sort of going back to the media, because the media is what affects us all. It's what we all see everywhere, whether it's online or in the shops. The more representation that we see on our TVs or in our newspapers, the more it becomes, you know, the norm or acceptable to everyone. So I think that's why it's so important that we need better representation of all sorts of different rare diseases and disabilities, because again, the more we see it, the more it is just regular to us.
Could not agree more, good sir. And I'm acutely aware we're running out of time. We need to get into the Q&A. But before you, I'm going to throw around, and I'm going to give you a chance to plug your Twitters, because I know that's important, and also give a call to action. When people leave this session, what small thing can they implement in their daily lives that will help push this conversation forward? Vicki, I'm going to throw to you.
I hope when people leave that they take away the fact that it isn't bad to ask questions of people, that in fact is important, and we all have, like Ross said, we've all got a part to play. It doesn't come down to one specific group of people, but unless we all work together, we all ask questions to each other, and we all begin to learn, then it will not work, and it requires everybody to be on board with that. So I do hope that when people leave, that they take that from this, and when they do see someone that, rather than pointing and staring or rushing kids away, they take the time, if appropriate, to ask the questions and start the conversations, because once you do start them, they're never near as scary as what you think they are. They were terrifying. I was terrified to start these conversations when Holly was first diagnosed. They're a breeze once you get used to them. They're scary to begin with, but well worth it once you do start them. And I hope people take that away from today, if nothing else.
Could not agree more with you, my dear. Mr. Graham Miller, what say you?
I mean, I get kind of a little bit more of a personal thing, if you don't mind, Adam. I mean, it takes me approximately 9 months from initial engagement to actually starting to take photographs, which is a long time. And much of that time is spent in quite naturally gaining trust and confidence of the people that I'm going to be working with. And I would ask the people who are listening today to maybe embrace what we are trying to do as artists, because I can understand that by definition there's vulnerability, but we are trying to do our best, and we would really welcome the support of the community in doing that. Open up to us and give us the chance to share your voice, really.
Thank you very much, good sir. Dagmar Bennett, as the mother of our child, Adam Jr., what would your call to action be? Is she on mute?
Seemed to disappear.
She's disappeared. Okay. Well, I will miss her. I'm assuming she's dead. I'll miss her. Ross, where are you on this? What's your call to action, good sir?
So I would say, ending this today, that there are two main factors that I think we need to focus on. One of which I know Vicky's mentioned is the educational side of things. I think kids needs to be taught from a young age that it is okay to, if you see somebody who maybe either looks or sounds a little bit different, it's okay to ask those questions and be personal with them, but in a respectful way. And secondly, as well as the education, it's the media. It's a call out to the media to say, look, we want to be represented as well. Give us a chance in these casting opportunities and show us on your platforms.
And again, I can't help but agree. And last but by no means least, Jordon.
I think that we should document our lives, whether it be positive or negative. We all have our own stories to tell at the end of the day, and having those stories seen by as many people as possible is going to help in making it easier and more acceptable for people.
And again, I completely agree. So this brings us to the end of the main panel. I think we've got a bit of time for Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, or if any have come in, then let's thrash this out. But if we don't have time, I'd like to thank everyone for watching and all the panelists for being here. But Mr. Ross, are there any questions in the chat that you think are particularly interesting?
Yeah, so I'm just having a little look through now. There's a great comment here from Andrea Reed Kelly, where they say that they've mentioned their condition, Noonan syndrome, and it says, in terms of my physical body and in terms of my character, but it's not, my condition is not who I am. It obviously plays a big part of who they are, but it's not the sole purpose, which I think is a great comment, because we all, it's so easy. I can only talk from a wheelchair user's point of view, but you often get known as, oh, that guy in the wheelchair. And it's like, I am a human, I am just Ross to all my friends and that. So yeah, that's a great comment from Andrea. Let's see what else we've got here. People are talking about our conversation about inspirational. We've got a comment here from Victoria Headley saying, it's a great question, Adam. some of my colleagues really say the inspirational word and they don't believe that it's the right word to use. It's a tricky debate, I think. It really is one of those debates with that one.
It is. I mean, as we said, it's always well-meaning. But I'm sure, like a lot of people who are at this festival, I watched Children in Need a couple of weeks ago just chewing my arm off with utter frustration. I think the song Fix You by Coldplay has got a lot to answer for in this debate.
Absolutely. I think there's one more question here, which I think you could probably put this to Vicki, actually, because I know Holly being younger, it's saying, do you think companies like Barbie and Playmobil are moving things forward by making toys that represent different body types?
I do think that it's certainly helpful going forward a wee bit. I still think there's a long way to go. For instance, Holly wears leg splints. It's not something that you can get anywhere. We actually reached out to a manufacturing company in Glasgow. We sent her doll on a little package holiday to Glasgow. Photos taken, the company couldn't have been greater. They took photos of the doll all over Glasgow and then cast the doll's legs and created camouflage splints to match Holly's very own, so that she had a doll that was just like her. We did that. It wasn't cheap to do that, but we felt like it was something we needed to do because there wasn't other dolls on the market at the time that represented Holly. Now that there is Barbie dolls that show different body types, some have wheelchairs, crutches, things like that, it definitely it reached out to Holly in a way that toys really hadn't before that point. So I do think it's definitely a good step forward, but I do think there is still more to be done, but definitely a way forward for sure.
Great answer. Completely.
Sorry, everybody, my laptop went off. I'm back. What was the last question you asked, Adam? Was it an action? Can I just go back to that? If
Yes,
that's okay?
absolutely. What would your one call to action be for people when they leave this conference?
Yeah, I've got a few. I would definitely say, I'm just writing down whilst everyone was talking as well, I was just saying to challenge yourself. So really think about challenge yourself and what you're thinking, but also educate yourself and don't rely on people with rare diseases to educate for you, which kind of goes back to Ross's point of it's not his place to educate people. Sometimes it's up to us as individuals to educate ourselves. And then also think about how, whether it's within the workplace or within your community, how can you change the structures that put in place barriers for people? And, if there's a way that you can change a structure to help people with rare diseases, then that, I think, where a lot of the change could happen. There you go. Thank you. Sorry, I cut off.
Hey, no, completely fine. Completely agree with it as well. Couldn't have put it better myself. And anything else in the chat, Mr. Ross? Anything that takes your fancy? Anyone asking for my phone number, or if I'm single, or if you're single even?
Guys, there's some really positive comments in here. People have really enjoyed the chat, so I think we might as well just give ourselves a round of applause. Why not? Make ourselves.
Well, I think it's time then, since people have enjoyed it, that we all quit while the going's good. It all slides downhill. So, as I said, it's a real pleasure to have you all on this panel. I couldn't have asked for a better panel, in fact, and I think it's important that the conversation doesn't stop here. So, by all means, hunt us all down online. Get in touch with us if there's anything you want to know that you didn't want to write in the chat that's maybe a bit more personal or a bit more nuanced. Come find us online. We're more than happy to talk. But thank you, Cambridge Rare Disease Fest 2020, for having us all. It's been an absolute pleasure. Panelists, any last thoughts? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
I would just like to say thank you, Adam, and Rare Disease Festival, and for all of the amazing panelists. And also, you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, same here.
Yes, guys.
Thanks very much, guys. Enjoy the rest of the festival.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, gang.
Bye.